So I wanted to get into this by first um, getting into a question for Dr. Raymond Wimbush. And I'd like you, Raymond, if you could, to explain Pan Africanism, why it is important for the global African community and for the African American community to have a deep understanding of its origins, its history, and its impact on our people.
Well, greetings, Baba Oba. I'm really glad to be here with you and Nadia to talk about this very important subject. At the superficial level, as you just pointed out so eloquently, we see people like Ice Cube and others, talking kind of vaguely about issues of Pan-Africanism. And what I have found out in my work is that most Black folk, unfortunately, don't know what it is. And first of all, it's an ideology and a political movement. It's the idea that globally, the African people, our African people, be they on the continent or in the diaspora, are one family. And the idea that we share a common culture, we share common political issues, we share a common history, and that it's something that is culturally it's embedded in us that we are an African people. We'll get in, I'm sure, to people like Marcus Garvey and others as the program advances. I think that I consider myself a Pan-Africanist Black nationalist, and I believe that most Black folk, unfortunately, have a heavy dose of Western Eurocentric, history, mathematics, just any aspect of knowledge. And that Pan-Africanism, which is always competed, for our people's attention, has not been able to do that simply because of the issue of power. You can date Pan-Africanism as early as the 1750s with Kwabena Oba T'Shaka, who wrote a book about it, in fact, about the injustices of enslavement and so forth. I always call that the early Pan-Africanism. And then we'll talk about, Pan-Africanism with Sylvester Williams in the, early 1800s and others who taught, build it up over the past 120 odd years. So Pan-Africanism is a way of thinking that you are an African in the diaspora, and that informs your religious views, your educational views, your political views, everything. And that ultimately that formation of those in the diaspora hopefully will translate into political activity that will make a united Africa.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that even before the word Pan-Africanism came up in the dictionary, that you had Blacks in enslavement most of whom were not Christians, but some of whom called themselves Ethiopianists.
That's right.
This came out of a biblical passage that princes shall come out of Egypt, Ethiopia shall stretch forth his hand under God soon. And so that indicated an identification of enslaved Africans with Africa. They refused to accept the white man's version of Christianity, those that did embrace it. And I think also it's important to note that enslaved Africans, over a period of time, lost a memory of what ethnic group they came from, Yoruba, Asante, whatever, but they came to identify with the whole of Africa. And so they began to look at Africa as one. And I think the real important thing about this history is to recognize it's Africans in the US and the Caribbean who gave birth to this idea of one Africa.
That's right.
And then it translated back to the continent. So even though we faced the brainwashing and we have confusion around our identification with Africa, in crisis period, we usually identify with Africa.